CBJ. And today we're doing Daniel 2. So last time I taught, we did Daniel 1, so we'll just keep going. And this is a pretty long chapter, so I'll probably do a lot more reading than talking. Hope everybody went to the restroom and have a snack. So last time we met Daniel, and he was a teenager. So a lot of what we were talking about was as him being a teenager and his three friends, they were standing firm for God. So during that time is when Israel was taken into captivity by the Babylonians. And during this 70-year period, Israel was somewhat being punished for not following God. So they lost the privilege of being in their land. And these promising young men, Daniel and the others, they were taken to be groomed to be advisors for the king. And again, they stood by their faith by not eating what the king wanted them to eat, and still they were successful because God honored them and blessed them and gave them favor in the kingdom. So now we're a little bit later in Daniel's life, just a couple of years, so he's probably around 18 to 20. So starting with Daniel 2, verse 1, it says, let me get some drink first. It says, now in the second year of Nebuchadnezzar's reign, Nebuchadnezzar had dreams, and his spirit was so troubled that his sleep left him. Then the king gave the command to call the magicians, the astrologers, the sorcerers, and the Chaldeans to tell the king his dreams. So they came and stood before the king. So here was all the heavy hitters. Daniel and his friends were still pretty young, so they weren't invited to come up. And then the king said to them, I have had a dream, and my spirit is anxious to know the dream. Then the Chaldeans spoke to the king in Aramaic, saying, O king, live forever. Tell your servants the dream, and we will give the interpretation. So here's something interesting in the Bible. So between right now and through chapter 7, it's no longer in Hebrew. So the Old Testament is written in Hebrew, but here it changes to Aramaic. So during this time, this was the language of the world. So by speaking in Aramaic, it's giving emphasis that these next several chapters are for the Gentiles, or for the people of the world. So continue in verse 5, it says, the king answered and said to the Chaldeans, my decision is firm. If you do not make known the dream to me and its interpretation, you shall be cut into pieces, and your houses shall be made an ash heap. So here he clearly defines his expectations. No clarifying questions are required, so everybody knows what's up here. So it's still the king speaking. He says, however, if you tell the dream and its interpretation, you shall receive from me gifts, rewards, and great honor. Therefore, tell me the dream and its interpretation. So they answered again and said, let the king tell his servants the dream, and we will give its interpretation. The king answered and said, I know for certain that you would gain time because you see my decision is firm. So here they're trying to stall, and the king's trying to call them out on that. So the king continues to say, if you do not make known the dream to me, there is only one decree for you. For you have agreed to speak lying and corrupt words before me till the time has changed. Therefore, tell me the dream, and I shall know that you can give its interpretation. So I think here the king is saying that he knows that these guys, what they've been doing is fake. He knows they're imposters. So to really put them to the test, he wants them to tell him the dream. He's faking that he's forgotten the dream. So he knows it's easy for anyone to make up something if they know the dream. And then also, too, it must be God must be pressing on him how important this dream is. So he wants to know what's going on. So then again, the Chaldeans answered the king and said, there is not a man on earth who can tell the king's matter. Therefore, no king, lord, or ruler has ever asked such a thing of any magician, astrologer, or Chaldean. It is a difficult thing that the king requests, and there is no other who can tell the king except the gods whose dwelling is not with flesh. So they're right. No one can tell this dream without any kind of supernatural power. So continuing at verse 12, it says, for this reason the king was angry and very furious, and he gave the command to destroy all the wise men of Babylon. So he's keeping with his word. So the decree went out, and they began killing the wise men, and they sought Daniel and his companions to kill them. Then with counsel and wisdom, Daniel answered Arioch. So here Daniel is with counsel and wisdom. Where do you get good counsel and wisdom from? From godly men and women. And then how do you get it from God himself? Is prayer. So one thing we see in Daniel over and over and over again is the theme of prayer. So if you remember from chapter 1, he prayed. And again here he prayed. And several more times throughout the book he prays. So this is the example for us. And then also with Daniel, throughout all the people we hear about in the Bible, there's usually something negative said about them. There's nothing negative recorded about Daniel in Scripture. Then continuing verse 14, he says, Then with counsel and wisdom, Daniel answered Arioch, the captain of the king's guard, who had gone out to kill all the wise men of Babylon. He answered, and he answered and said to Arioch, the king's captain, Why is the decree from the king so urgent? Then Arioch made the decision known to Daniel. So Daniel went in and asked the king to give him time that he might tell the king interpretation. So here he's being bold after he knows what everybody's been said, but he's going to try with the help of God. And then Daniel went into his house and made the decision known to Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, his companions. So basically here he's checked in with his men's group. So then continuing with verse 18, it says that they might seek mercies from God of heaven concerning this secret, where our God is merciful, so that Daniel and his companions might not perish with the rest of the wise men of Babylon. So one thing that's interesting here is usually when the government does something we don't like, we'll go among each other and complain and grumble and badmouth whoever's in charge. However, here Daniel didn't do that. He just went to God and prayed and let God handle things. And we need to remember, too, that the Bible teaches that the rulers are placed for us. So even though Nebuchadnezzar here was the ruler, Daniel was still following him and respecting him, even though the direction given wasn't good. So then at verse 19 it says, Then the secret was revealed to Daniel in a night vision. So Daniel blessed the God of heaven. And Daniel answered and said, and here he's praying again, Blessed be the name of God forever and ever, for wisdom and might are his. And he changes the times and the seasons. He removes kings and raises up kings. He gives wisdom to the wise and knowledge to those who have understanding. He reveals deep secret things. He knows what is in the darkness, and light dwells with him. I thank you and praise you, O God of my fathers. You have given me wisdom and might, and have now made known to me what we asked of you, for you have made known to us the king's demand. So again, he prayed before and after. So as soon as he got the answer from God, he didn't run off. He took a moment to thank God. Often we forget to thank God for when he works things out in our lives. So we need to remember just to take time and thank God for what he's done and what he's doing. So continuing at verse 24, Therefore Daniel went to Arioch, whom the king had appointed to destroy the wise men of Babylon. And he sent and said thus to him, Do not destroy the wise men of Babylon. Take me before the king, and I will tell the interpretation. So then Arioch quickly brought Daniel before the king. So I'm sure Arioch did not like having to do what he was doing. So he quickly did what he could to stop it. And then he said to him, I have found a man of the captives of Judah who will make known to the king the interpretation. So again, he's trying to take credit here. So obviously he must have had a lot of confidence in Daniel and his abilities. So the king answered and said to Daniel, whose name was Belteshazzar, Are you able to make known to me the dream which I have seen and its interpretation? Daniel answered in the presence of the king and said, The secret which the king has demanded, the wise men, the astrologers, the magicians, and the soothsayers cannot declare to the king. But there is a God in heaven who reveals secrets, and he has made known to King Nebuchadnezzar what will be in the latter days. So here we're seeing what the purpose of this dream is, for us to understand what will happen in the latter days. So a lot of Daniel and a lot of the Bible is prophecy. And because of this, the book of Daniel has been criticized a lot by people throughout the years. They accuse Daniel of being written much later. So this example and other things in Daniel really make it look like you had to have some foreknowledge of what was going on, which is easier after it's already happened. However, they forget that Daniel was translated with the whole Old Testament into Greek about 300 years before Christ lived. So this is called the Septuagint. So we still have several of these manuscripts on copy proving that this was at least written 300 years before Christ. And then also, more importantly, Jesus himself validated Daniel. So in Mark 13:14 and Matthew 24:15, for those of you taking notes, Jesus said that Daniel was a prophet when he was quoting stuff from Daniel. So if Jesus can validate him, then he has to be real. And then also we have to be careful when we're talking about prophecy, because really to understand, you have to know the whole Bible. So the Bible is good at interpreting itself. So if you see something in one part, something later on may help explain it. And a lot of teachers, they'll get off and get lost and start misleading others when they're trying to twist it to be this or to be that. And that's where a lot of cults come about. One experience I had, there was someone I was listening to who caught my attention because he was talking about a lot of cool things about prophecy. And he was drawing my attention. But then after listening to him for a while, he started slipping in other things that are against the Bible. So we got to be careful that when we're listening to people that we know that they're based on the Bible and they're teaching what the Bible actually says, instead of just trying to get our attention and try to get a following. And then also we know how Satan likes to twist God's words. And one thing I think God tries to do is when he does talk about prophecy, he tries to complete it by doing his own twist. So just like when we learn in the New Testament, when the Jews were waiting for Jesus, they had a different expectation of what Jesus would be than what he really turned out to be. So one thing we need to be careful of is things we're looking for, that we don't get locked into one view or one opinion, because God has a way of twisting it. And I imagine this is to try to keep Satan from knowing God's true plan. And then as we get closer to things, God will let us know what's happening. So continuing in verse 28, it says, "But there is a God in heaven who reveals secrets, and he has made known to King Nebuchadnezzar what will be in the latter days. Your dream, the visions of your head upon your bed were these. As for you, O king, thoughts came to your mind while on your bed about what would come to pass after this. And he who reveals secrets has made known to you what will be." And of course, it's God who reveals secrets. "But as for me, this secret has not been revealed to me because I have more wisdom than anyone living, but for our sakes, who make known the interpretation to the king, that you may know the thoughts of your heart." And it's interesting here that he says for our sakes, and later on he says we, where he's talking about him and his prayer group. So he's giving credit to everyone who was helping him pray, his other friends. And he says in 31, "You, O king, were watching and beheld a great image." And remember, this is a culture of images and idols. So God was speaking to Nebuchadnezzar how he would understand it. So this great image, whose splendor was excellent, stood before you, and its form was awesome. So this was very impressive. Some translations say terrible, but it doesn't mean scary. It means very impressive. So it was probably larger than anything he's ever seen, and more detailed and beautiful than anything he's ever seen. This image head was of gold, was of fine gold, its chest and arms of silver, and its belly of thighs and bronze, its legs of iron, its feet partly of iron and partly of clay. You watched while a stone was cut out without hands, which struck the image on its feet of iron and clay and broke them into pieces. Then the iron, the clay, the bronze, the silver, the gold were crushed together and became like chaff from the summer threshing floors. The wind carried them away so that no trace of them was found, and the stone that struck the image became a great mountain and filled the whole earth. This is the dream, and now we will tell the interpretation before the king. So here we are. Daniel just told the king what the dream was. So I imagine Nebuchadnezzar's mouth was open, hit the floor. So Daniel has his attention. And then also, this is going to validate everything that Daniel has to say. And because we know that God is our God. And then Daniel says, "You, O king, are a king of kings, for the God of heaven has given you a kingdom of power, strength, and glory." So here it says that God has given Nebuchadnezzar this power. It wasn't anything that he did or he earned. It's just God had a purpose, and Nebuchadnezzar was the man he chose to fulfill that purpose. Then continuing with verse 38, it says, "Whenever the children of men dwell, wherever the children of men dwell, or the beasts of the field and the birds of heaven, he is giving them into your hand and has made you ruler of all of them. You are this head of gold. But after you shall rise another kingdom inferior to yours, then another, a third kingdom of bronze, which shall rule over all the earth. And the fourth kingdom shall be as strong as iron, inasmuch iron breaks in pieces and shatters everything. And like iron that crushes that kingdom, it will break in pieces and crush all the others." So we'll pause here and we'll look at our slide. So here's an image of what Nebuchadnezzar saw. So we have this great image of the various materials that it took to make it. So we had the head of gold, the chest and arms of silver, belly and thighs of bronze or brass, legs of iron, feet of iron and clay, and then we have the crushing rock. So here we start at the very top with the head of gold, which represents the Babylonians, which was Nebuchadnezzar's kingdom at this time. And here, this was the best and the most valuable of all the materials. And also, it's the most joined, the most connected. But then they were later beaten when the Medes and the Persians joined together to conquer Babylon. So this made the chest and the arms. And in the arms, you got the two forces coming together, the Medes and the Persians. And then we had the bronze or the brass, which is the belly, and the thighs. This made up the Greek Empire, which again came and conquered the Medes and the Persians. And then we move on to the iron legs, which was the Roman Empire. And this was the empire that conquered the Greeks. And this was the empire that was around when Jesus was around. So we learn more about them just as we study the New Testament and what Herod was trying to do for kill Jesus during Christmas, during his life. And then we have the two legs of this Roman Empire because we had a western side and an eastern side. And again, they're all going down in value as their strength goes up. And as their strength goes up, also did their evil and the things they've done. And then this is where we are today. So continuing with verse 41, it says, "Whereas you saw the feet and toes, partially of potter's clay and partially of iron, the kingdom shall be divided, yet the strength of the iron shall be in it, just as you saw the iron mixed with ceramic clay. And as the toes of the feet were partially of iron and partially of clay, so the kingdom shall be partially strong and partially fragile. As you saw iron mixed with ceramic clay, they will mingle with the seeds of men, and they will not adhere to one another, just as iron does not mix with clay." So this part is yet to come. So, again, because of this verse and other ones in the Bible here, a lot of people are looking for a revised Roman Empire. So Rome never was conquered by a different empire. So people are expecting for one form or another for Rome to come back as a world empire. And in a lot of ways, the Roman Empire is kind of still alive today. So with the Vatican and the Pope being based out of Rome, they have a large influence on the world. And then also a lot of the Roman things still influence us today through language, through culture, through government. There's still a lot of elements that Rome has left on us. So we're still expecting as believers a one world government to try to form together with really attempts of trying to defeat God. So who will lead this one world government? The Antichrist, the man of sin. And up until this time, several have attempted. So Charlemagne, Napoleon, Mussolini, Hitler, they've all tried to kind of reform their own one world empire, but God was not ready. None of these men succeeded in trying to take over. But one thing we're looking at is, as time goes, is we're trying to join more and more. So that's where this whole thing of tolerance is coming into place. So us Bible-believing Christians, we don't fit into this new world government, this new world religion. We are intolerant, as the world wants to say, although I think everyone's intolerant against us. So right now, there is a mindset and a culture shift trying to make us all more molded into one. So even Pope Francis is currently working very heavily trying to minimize the walls of differences between the different faiths. So he's trying to join all the different faiths together. And then also the Muslims, in their own way, they're trying hard to convert the world to Islam. So there's these different forces trying to take power. But then what are we doing? As Christians, are we trying to take over the world, not so much with the government, but with our faith in Christ? So one thing that in the New Testament we see where the world was kind of turned upside down by the believers. We're kind of missing out on that. And then also with having a one world government, not only do we need a one world religion, but we need a one world currency. And there's already efforts working towards that. The euro is most of Europe, and then we now have an SDR for the world. But things are kind of set up where things can easily crumble, and then a man will come in with the answers. Hopefully none of us will be here for that. And then also in our image, with our feet, it's mixed with the stone, or the steel and the clay. So it's going to be a mixed kingdom. And a lot of people have different guesses of what the clay is. Some think it's a religious element. Some think it's maybe a demonic element. We'll just have to wait and see. But we do have these 10 toes and these 10 kingdoms, which we'll see again later in Daniel and Revelation. So continuing with verse 44, it says, "And in the days of these kings, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom which shall never be destroyed, and the kingdom shall not be left to other people. It shall break in pieces and consume all these kingdoms, and it shall stand forever." So this rock, who does this rock represent? What's that? Christ. So one thing we have through the Bible is that Christ is our rock. So this rock is going to be carved from without using any human hands. So that's how we know it's supernatural. And it will defeat these kingdoms. It will defeat the 10 toes and crush them. So when the time has come, when the world joins together in their pride and ignorance to try to fight God, Jesus will return and defeat them and destroy them. And then also the Antichrist who's leading them, the false prophet, and then also all those that have joined that one world system. And then Jesus will set up his own kingdom here on earth for 1,000 years. So that's one thing we don't think about much, is one of the themes in the Bible is that man can't rule themselves. So one thing that God will show us is how to rule, how to be an effective ruler, how to keep peace, how to make us all get along. And that's where, with our image here, through these great empires, man keeps trying, but all man does is make it worse. So we aren't any better today than we were thousands of years ago. Sure, we may have new cool stuff and new technology, but we still are killing each other. We still hate each other. We're still living outside of God's will. So ever since we've left the garden, the world's been in a state of decay, and so has our forms of leadership and government. So Jesus will show us what it means to be a true leader. So then, let's see. And then also when Jesus is ruling, he won't need advisors. So just like Nebuchadnezzar had this whole team of people to give him advice, the different members he took from different cultures to try to get some of their influence and ideas. Our king won't need any of that. Our king will be awesome as he is. He won't need any human help. Although we as humans, we like telling God what to do, don't we? So we need to remember that God's will is above our own, and he can see things that we can't. So kind of like how BJ likes talking about when someone's at the top of a business, they're looking down, seeing all that's going on, where we are the workers. We're Christ workers. We just need to focus on the job he's given us at hand. We need to let God worry about the big things. So, and continuing at verse 45, it says, "Inasmuch as you saw that the stone was cut out of the mountain without hands, and that it broke into pieces the iron, the bronze, the clay, the silver, and the gold, the great God has made known to the king what will come to pass after this. The dream is certain, and its interpretation is sure." So then King Nebuchadnezzar fell on his face, prostrated before Daniel, and commanded that they should present an offering and incense to him. So obviously the king was impressed. And then he started treating Daniel as a god, which again, Daniel was saying from the beginning, this isn't him. This didn't come from him. It came from the true God. It says at 47, "The king answered Daniel and said, truly your God is the God of gods, the Lord of kings, and the revealer of secrets, since you could reveal this secret." Then the king promoted Daniel and gave him many great gifts, and he made him ruler over the whole province of Babylon and the chief administrator over all the wise men of Babylon. So again here, Daniel is elevated. And also with Nebuchadnezzar, this is like the first time he's really introduced to God. And we'll see later on in Daniel that it does seem as if he, after being humbled, he becomes a believer himself. And then it says, "Also Daniel petitioned the king and set Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego over the affairs of the province of Babylon, but Daniel sat in the gate of the king." So again, Daniel remembered those who had been helping him. So he lifted up those that had been praying and supporting and giving wise counsel. And then it says Daniel sat in the gate of the king. This means he was like a judge. He was a Supreme Court judge where he would rule over different affairs of the kingdom. And again, remember that he was a young man at this point. So this king, in all his pride, was still able to receive from Daniel and truly through God. So with this, it's kind of timely that we just had an election. And powers are always coming and going. So with our own government, soon Obama will be stepping down, and then Trump will be stepping up, and then before we know it, Trump will be stepping down. So whoever's in charge is basically always on their way out. And we need to make sure that we are serving a king who is coming and will serve forever. So the real question is, do you know the king? So we know Christ is coming. And we know that he's going to set things straight. And we'll have to decide, do we want to be part of his kingdom or part of the world's kingdom that gets destroyed? And then 2, we need to make sure that we're choosing Christ. So by choosing Christ, we will be part of his kingdom. But then we have to be careful because right now, which kingdom are we working for? Even if we choose Christ, are we working for this world kingdom or Christ's kingdom? So that's what I've just prepared for today. But please ask yourselves, who are you serving? Because there'll come a time where we'll have to choose. So let's pray. Lord, thank you for today, and just thank you for bringing us out here, and just thank you for teaching us your word, and help us to remember that you are coming, and you will set up your kingdom, Lord, and help us to choose you, Lord, and to be on the side of you, and if times get difficult, Help us just to turn to prayer and trust that you are working it all out for our good, even if we do have to suffer persecution for our true beliefs, Lord. But just thank you that we serve an awesome God who's able to